It's been in a blitz of the summary I gave you. But if I was to get deep into the details, it's just a bunch of miracles, small little miracles that kept on happening before our eyes, and that's what also kept us going.
Welcome to another show of Searching for Hope. We're really excited about our guest today. Our guest today is currently living in Maine, however, originally from the Democratic Republic of Congo. He might argue that he was always meant to be an American, but he's definitely from the Congo. Luc is a good friend of mine. We met in 2007 on a trip to the DR Congo, and Luc was someone who was just a dreamer. He was someone who was willing to go out and get it. And so that part of Luc and his willingness to just try something, didn't really care what anyone else thought, is sort of what got us to the story we look forward to telling today. The journey of finding out his daughter had a fatal liver disease, and how he fought for her survival and really gave up everything to keep her alive. And it's a really inspiring and powerful story. We look forward to sharing it with you. So Luc, thank you for joining us on our show today.
And thanks for welcoming me, and thanks for having me here.
A pleasure. So Luc, I have a simple question for you. This is just so that people get to know who Luc is a little bit. What makes you come alive? What makes Luc come to life?
I think I am someone who's eager to believe in causes, not any causes, but I stand strongly for my beliefs. It doesn't mean that I'm opinionated. It just means that I am purpose-driven on one hand, and also community-driven on the other hand. And that's quite a summary about what it really stands for. But if you want to look deep down into my beliefs, it's very easy for you to find out that my beliefs are entangled with my faith, my Christian faith mostly. So meaning standing up for God.
Maybe for fun, maybe a fun story again, just continuing to give people a little context of Luc. I mean, you've had a variety of jobs, and your career has done all dips and doodles to the point where your career for the last 2.5 years essentially has been fighting for your daughter's life. And we're going to get into that story, and I can't wait to get into that. But I can remember in the Congo moments where you and I were riding in a taxi down the streets in the Congo to moments where you're picking me up in an SUV with a driver. What's a fun story about Luc? What's a work? What's something you've done that is kind of crazy and out there? Maybe while you were living in the Congo.
I think when I cast a hindsight to the Congo and look at my times there, I realized that my life was soaked with God's mercy. That's the best way to put it, because I could literally say from the rags to the riches, but I wasn't wealthy. I just happened to have quite a significant leap forward from the conditions I started with initially. I was born and raised in poverty. My father was not wealthy. It took me a few decades before I could realize that my family was not wealthy. But I was very fortunate because with the little resources my father had, he decided to prioritize education. He sent us to some of the best schools in the city of Kinshasa. I mostly started with Catholic schools that gave me groundwork to build my personality and my understanding of concepts. I'm very keen on discussing concepts for hours and hours, and I believe the groundwork has been laid by the time. Coming out of a very poor environment, I had a lot of limitations, a lot of uncertainties about not just myself and my family, but also about the future. Because, as you know, there's a lot of corruption in the Congo. Historically, you have to be connected to the powers that be. You have to be connected to people who can wield influence in order for you to start climbing up the social ladder. And in my case, I did not have such connections. but I was just smart. God blessed me with the wits it takes for you to advance yourself with some type of career. I mean, on the one hand, you've got a lot of poverty. On the other hand, the poverty is mingled with joblessness. But I was fortunate to develop a talent, one of the numerous talents God has flooded my life with. My linguistic skills are the things that help me stand out of the pack. Uh, Being born in the Congo, a country with over 420 tribal languages, and I was surrounded by a forest of languages. So one of the things that was very easy for me to pick up, even from the streets or from home, was languages. Because at home we spoke primarily French, which was regarded as the intellectual language, the lingua franca, the business language in the Congo. And my father, who worked for the Bible Society for a period of time, had some English. He had quite some level of British English, and it became my role model. So inspiring myself from my father, gaining inspiration from him, I started borrowing his English Bible, comparing with my French Bible, and I was able to build a unique linguistic profile of a polyglot overnight in the Congo. And that's what I took with me to the Bible seminary that I attended. That's where I met you, by the way. And those skills were honed over the course of time by my interactions with a lot of Western friends, whether they were lecturers at the Bible seminary or whether they were just missionaries doing some random missionary work, just like yourself and the other friends in the Congo. So it gave me a unique ecosystem that allowed for me to be a little bit of a mashup. I wasn't that typical Congolese, or limited to a certain set of information. I'm not saying that the Congolese are limited, but I'm saying that I had exposure to more than just the Congolese languages and culture. That's what made of me a little bit of an international person. So pretty early in my 20s, I was able to sign a business contract with some government agencies from South Africa, and I became a consultant for them. So that would really get me out of poverty, because I was able to make a few $1,000s as a business owner, providing consultancy to government agencies, sitting with the powers that be in the Congo, and that made a career path of about 11 years in the high circles and decision-making circles of the Congo. And I was very privileged because I was privy to a lot of critical information, not just information, but also I had to partake some decision-making projects, including at a regional level. So those things made me a little bit unique. They helped me stand out of the pack. But still, I carried a very humble heart with me until I left the country.
So maybe that gets me to the next place I'd love to go. And I wonder whether maybe a lot of the skills you honed in the work that you were doing prior to these last 2.5 years, take me back to, I don't know the exact date, I should know the date, but just over 3 years ago, I believe, when Ticvah was born. And those next 2-3 months after Ticvah was born, tell me about what was going on there, and what did it inspire you to maybe do?
Yeah, so just for a recap for the other friends following us right now, not everything was rosy with my life. I've had some successes and some failures. And in 2010, my wife and I came together. We got married. We went through a lot of processes. We got married, and we had our first son. His name is Lael. It's Hebrew, means dedicated to God. And the next year, we're pregnant again. When our son was about freshly turned 1 year old. And in 2012, which is the time when Lael was 1 year old, our second born was a girl. Her name was Antonia. And we lost her at the hospital. So she never got to get home with us. She was born preterm. She was born at the 29th week. And it was a very risky pregnancy. Long story short, miraculously, my wife was able to deliver without a C-section. She almost passed away in the process of delivery. and we lost a child. It took us a little bit of time. We decided to take a break. 4 years later, in 2016, we found ourselves pregnant again. We decided that it was the right time for us to have another child because Lael was growing, and he needed friends and he needed family, siblings. So that's when things started. On the 6th month of the pregnancy, the doctors, one of the gynecologists told my wife to extend her contact details to her husband so the husband may call her. And it was a little bit of a murky situation. I called the gynecologist only to find out that there was a possibility for a genetic event at birth, meaning my daughter, because it looked like it was going to be a female baby, my daughter was coming, meaning Ticvah, was supposed to be born with some type of medical problems. It could be either what they thought at first to be esophageal atresia. Esophageal atresia is where you're born, but your throat is not your throat is not properly formed, and you're born with hazards of asphyxiation, asphyxiation at birth, and that's not something that could be taken care of in a place like the Congo. And the second possibility was biliary atresia. So the doctors didn't know what to expect because they didn't have all the medical equipment to come up with a clear diagnosis and come up with a clear forecast, a prognosis. So we had to go for a second opinion. We left the Congo by the time my wife was 7 months pregnant, like 2 months before the delivery. And we were able to outsource some resources from our friends and community, went down to South Africa for a second opinion. But by the time we got there, we were supposed to get what was called NIPT, non-invasive puncture testing. But because it was 7 months of pregnancy, it was at risk for both the mother and the fetus. So the doctors decided not to do an NIPT, but they did some scans and landed on the conclusion that based on 5D imaging, the baby was looking healthy and there was no particular event to fear at birth. But they told us we had a choice between staying in South Africa, waiting for her to be born in South Africa, and if there's anything that needs to be taken care of, they can take care of it, or we can go back to the Congo. We didn't have the resources to overstay in South Africa, so we went back to the Congo. 2 months later, Ticvah was born, full term, beautiful little baby. Ticvah means hope, by the way, in Hebrew. And nothing at the hospital could indicate that there was something wrong with the baby. It took us about 5 days at the hospital. They decided to put her on antibiotics, given the genetic events that they were forecasting, and they started to treat her on antibiotics because she was a little weak at birth. 5 days later, she was up and running and we're on our way home. So as soon as we got home, we didn't notice that she started developing a jaundice, meaning yellow eyes and white stools. And about a month and a half later, that's when we find out. She was born in October of 2016. A month and a half later, that's when we find out that there was something that was fishy with the baby, and she needed the kind of medical care that the Congo could not provide. So not having the resources, not knowing what the disease really was, not having the technology in the country, our only hope to stay alive was for her to go abroad. And I'll just go for a little bit of an anecdote. The doctors kind of had to Google it to find out that based on the symptoms, this is what can potentially be the condition. They were already hinting at biliary atresia, but they did not have full certainty. So we decided to travel abroad, but we didn't know where we were going abroad. So I came public on social media using Facebook, sharing with my friends and their networks, and my friends just helped spread the message in the community. It became like a social media buzz. At first, it didn't take place overnight. Like there was a period of silence that was a little unsavory for me because my wife and I were dealing with it in silence. We took a lot of courage in order to come and share publicly the challenge we're encountering. But then people came our way.
Luc, can I interrupt you here for a second?
Not a problem, yes.
So like in some ways, it was at that point you realized that whatever was going on with Ticvah was not going to be able to be cared for in the Congo.
That's
You
correct.
also knew that funds-wise, you didn't have access to a large amount of funds.
Yes.
And my understanding is somehow you garnered, by selling your stuff and groups of friends
Yes.
overseas, you ended up getting enough money just basically to get tickets to the States.
That's
Hoping
correct.
to get in
Yes.
somewhere in the States and hoping that you'd get a free healthcare or free help. Is that, or some form of help?
That's a good summary. But the truth is, it was a lot more complex because we didn't know what we're coming here for. We thought we were coming for a second opinion to get the medical images required for us to travel back to the Congo. That was initially the dream. But we secured a medical visa. It's a long and complex story because a visa is difficult in the Congo and a medical visa is twice as difficult. And we're not traveling as an individual or a handful of people, but it was the entire family of 4. And little did we know that by the time my wife was already pregnant from another child that we're expecting, our baby Alexander. We'll only find out about it halfway through when we're facing out the difficulties in the US. So it was a very murky and difficult situation. Yeah, so we got in the US thanks to American connections. Some of the people responded and showed generosity either with finance or with connections where people that we're not acquainted with. They just heard about the story, they were moved by God, I have to say, and they provided us with a lot of facilities. But little did we know that not everything was set up for us to have a smooth ride. We got in the US in Omaha, Nebraska, in the winter of 2017. And that's when we find out after 9 days of hospital stay that the bills are extremely high. We're dealing with about $116,000 of medical bills for a short stay, including all the examinations and CT scan and MRI. And also the doctors decided, I mean, not the doctors, but the hospital administration decided to stop all the treatment plan because the family did not have the resources. We're foreigners, we're on medical visa, we could not work, we couldn't make any money, we could not go for a payment plan, we did not have a significant backup back home, and even in the US, we tried to raise support for the local community in Omaha, Nebraska. But the goal was first $500,000 in order for them to put her on the transplant list because it looked like she was going to be a liver transplant candidate. And then it turned out to be $750,000. So when combined, the need was for more than $750,000, was nearly $1 million because you have that, the medical bills, you have what it takes for the baby to be on a transplant list, but also you have the cost of living for the family. We didn't have none of those structures, so we were at mercy of a lot of terrible circumstances. We were in a charity house for a period of time, but we lost the elements that qualified us for staying at a charity house, and we had to leave the place. We almost became homeless. That's when some of our Canadian friends helped connect us with some generous families in Omaha, Nebraska, who decided to pay for rent for at least 3 months in order for us not to be homeless with a terminally ill baby and a pregnant woman. So we stayed in Omaha.
So Luc, I'm gonna cut in here for a second.
No worries.
So,
yes.
You've already, I mean, for me and for anyone listening, I mean, you're painted a picture of what I would argue to be a season that I'm sure on a day-to-day basis felt completely uncertain.
Yes.
I mean, at one point you're finally told that it looks like Ticvah needs a transplant.
Yes.
And you're sitting there saying, I don't know. I'm now in the US where the cost of this transplant is astronomical.
Yes.
Where we don't have that many connections. We have some, but we don't have that many. And I'm certain, I would assume, if I put myself in your shoes, that, I I mean, I would have felt completely hopeless. I would have felt stuck. I would have felt fear, anxiety. I probably wouldn't have slept that night, which I'm sure you had as well. I'm curious, from the outside looking in, Luc, and I know you had some really hard seasons, something in you gave you the hope to fight and fight and fight, where many people would have said, like, every door is closing. What was it that caused you to just keep pushing and like finding hope even though every door kept slamming? Okay, now you're homeless. Okay,
Yes.
now I'm in the US and I'm homeless. Now what do I do? In a cold city.
Yes, extremely cold, Omaha, Nebraska. And so it's a combination of factors. I think on the one hand, we loved our daughter, my wife and I. And remembering the fact that we're no strangers to loss, we didn't want to go back to another loss. And we were prepared to fight, bacon nails in order to do whatever it takes to save her life. But second, we knew that there's some generosity in this world. I like telling people, especially the media, because we use some media support in Omaha, Nebraska, to try and promote the cause. And I used to tell the media that I am a staunch believer in humanity. I believe that even in a failed world like ours, there's always someone out there with generosity who's ready to go an extra mile in order to help you cross a bridge that seemed to be absent. And thirdly, and most importantly, we had faith in God. We believed that God was good enough not to allow us to lose another child. That's one thing. That the second, we believed that God was Father and loving enough to be a father and protector for Ticvah, that he had a future for her, even where we could not see it. So we combined our Christian faith with our determination and just relentlessness in order to start crossing bridges. It's if I was to take time to elaborate on every single aspect, even coming from the Congo to the U.S., it's been in a blitz of the summary I gave you. But if I was to get deep into the details, it's just a bunch of miracles, small little miracles that kept on happening before our eyes, and that what also kept us going, because we kept on realizing that even though we don't have this, we already have that, because in the first place, hey, she was supposed to be born, she was supposed to be dead in the Congo. She was supposed not to be living more than 5 months, because the condition was like a sentence for her in the Congo. But God made it possible for her to get resources, to get an American visa, get airplanes, and get to an American hospital, for us to see American doctors caring for a daughter, even where they had limitations because of the circumstances. It was already a win, because it was an indication that God has a plan and a future for this little one. So in a sense, we didn't focus on our issues, we focused on our hope and our faith. Yes.
I remember very vividly, whether it was face-to-face on a visit with you, or whether it was over the phone or in a message, a comment, you can correct me if I get this wrong, but something along the lines of saying, we understand that fate is against us and that Ticvah might not make it. But you said something to the effect of, but I can't live with myself unless I do everything I possibly can.
Yes.
And I need to do it all. And if that means I sacrifice all of my resources and everything I possibly can, and I look like a fool in front of someone trying to beg, you kind of said, I'm going to do that. And if we still don't make it, I at least know that we did all that we could.
That's correct. And Paul, if you may allow, just to try and give a glimpse of the challenges and sacrifices we're up against. I almost interrupted a meeting by Warren Buffett, one of the most powerful people here on the planet. He lives in Omaha, Nebraska, and I had to go on stage a seating. What is it? Not a demonstration, but we're carrying some signage that I had printed, very large signage with a picture of Jimmy Kimmel on the one hand and my daughter on the other hand, very large pictures, and it was quite a large sign. And Warren Buffett was busy having a meeting with his fellow investors, shareholders, and I had a statement below with my phone number for being contacted, telling them, just like Jimmy Kimmel, I just want my daughter to live. I want my daughter to have a future. And that was about 5 days after Jimmy Kimmel's story came out that his baby had a heart transplant. So we had to do crazy things. We had to knock on doors of NBA superstars. We had to be turned down by a lot of people. We were promised support, and we saw some of the doors that were wide open shut down. And there was a moment when we became an encumbrance, even for a host in Omaha, Nebraska, and we had to go. So after a 7,500 miles leap of faith from the Congo to Omaha, Nebraska, and failing to raise enough support for the baby, and the time was ticking, it was like a time bomb in Ticvah's liver, we knew we were on the brink of losing her. A visa was about, we had been in the country for 4 months, a visa was expiring in a month and a half. So we had all these challenges, but we decided that when every single door we knocked on in New York City, in California, Silicon Valley, I went all the way to Facebook on the campus, and I was not allowed to get in because of protocol and things like those. So we tried every single thing people could imagine, or even beyond what they could imagine. Then we end up deciding with a terminally ill child and almost due mother to travel from Omaha, Nebraska to Portland, Maine, because I heard about the fact that there might be hope in Maine simply because the state of Maine does not discriminate against foreigners. It allows for children who are less than 21 years of age to come and get medical coverage if they need medical attention. And this is what brought us here in the first place. So some people raised the finance it took for us to fly from Omaha to Boston, because otherwise we're going to come by train. It was going to be a 40 hours train ride with a terminally ill baby. She might not have made it. And she was about 10, 11 pounds by the time, no matter how old she was. So it was quite a major challenge. We traveled dangerously under such conditions and got to Boston. And from Boston, we boarded the bus and came to Maine. And on that night, my entire family landed in a homeless shelter. We were homeless in Maine. After everything I've done and lived in the Congo, from interacting and working with ambassadors to being a junior executive in a large telecommunication corporation, to interacting personally with heads of state and things like those, but I ended up being homeless for a second time in the city of Portland, Maine. But that's where prayer and faith changed our fate. And those are things I will detail in the book we're currently working on. But literally in a matter of 24 hours, our story moved from south to north all of a sudden, because the doctors to whom we brought our daughter, because we wanted them to just give us an opinion about how she was doing after we traveled from Maine, from Omaha to Maine. They looked at her to say, this baby is not going to survive in a homeless shelter, and we need to do something. They kept her at the Barbara Bush Children's Hospital, started taking care of her daughter, and we're getting ready to go back to the homeless shelter to come back to the hospital the next morning. But they were like, where are you going? And we said, we're going to the homeless shelter. We need to be there before 7 p.m. to make sure that we can secure a spot for the night, because we're sleeping on flat mattresses with 13 other families the night before, which was a horrendous situation. And the doctor said to the social workers to do something. They called the local Ronald McDonald House to get us in there and get us out of the street. And the story progressed. I ended up filing for asylum. It's a long political history that I have. I ended up filing for asylum, and a lot of parameters started changing in my family history. And today, as we're talking, maybe she may allow me to say that, Ticvah is alive and well. I can hear her screaming from upstairs. She's busy, like chuckling, laughing, and playing like silly, because she finally got that new liver after almost 2.5 years of waiting.
Wow. So maybe a question I have, and I mean, Ticvah's story is such a powerful one. I mean, her name is Hope, and the hope and the fight for you guys was for her life. Um, Maybe in a quick answer, what did it feel like when you got the call that she was going to be getting a transplant?
Well, we get the call and we found out less than 24 hours later that the liver was not a match.
Hmm.
So the call we waited for 2 years and a half came, but it was the wrong call.
Hmm.
And she was already dying because she had been bleeding to death for almost 3 weeks in two different hospitals, and she was down in Boston where they were trying to maintain her, but they was losing hope and losing control. They tried the best of their science. And that's when I moved into the hospital to stay with her to allow my wife some time of rest. And the doctors came and told me, you need to get ready in less than 48 hours. She's going to go. She's going to die. That's when I told them what came to cross my mind at the time of like, thank you for everything you've done for her, but this is the end of your science. And here we have entered the turf of God. So I spoke my faith, not knowing what to expect. And I told them she's going to be fine. She was going to leave. She's going to live so long she could end up being one of the medical doctors on your transplant team in the future. It was crazy. So long story short, 6 days later, Ticvah started getting better all of a sudden without the help of medication because all the treatments had failed and the doctors almost stopped treating her. They were just monitoring her vitals for a set of time. But she started getting better, and another liver was found overnight. 6 days later, she was on the transplant table for 10 hours of surgery, and we're talking about a tiny little girl, three-year-old. She was less than, I think she was less than 20 pounds. She was between 20 and 22 pounds by the time of the surgery, three-year-old. And they did the surgery with success, keeping in mind that she had that clotting disorder, blood clotting disorder, where she was just depleting herself from her blood, like dying by bleeding. And there was a moment when she told me that she was dying. She told me dodo in French, meaning asleep, like she was falling asleep. And meanwhile, while she was dying, I was busy praying over her. I have called people on social media, requested for prayer. We had more than 25,000 people. It was like the social media buzz. People saw the video, they were alarmed. The video was spread around the globe between the US, Canada, Europe, and Africa. People called me from countries where I have no friends just to tell me that they were busy praying and trusting God that the baby is going to live. And what happened is that after 10 hours of surgery, keep in mind, if a pimple could cause her to deplete herself from her blood, now a liver transplant surgery was much more dangerous. But for 10 hours, no horrible development. Everything was stable. She went through the surgery and she came out of it. So long story short, yes, we have encountered desperation, but we have also encountered hope. And I'll say that right at the boundaries of our strength, that were our hope and our faith was born. And the Bible says that God honors the faith of his children. And that's what exactly has happened with us. Every time we go through difficult times, we look at Ticvah as a potent testimony of God's fidelity, his faithfulness. And that what keeps us going all the time. It has become a little bit of a landmark case for us in order to help us cope with any other difficulty.
Wow, thanks, Luc. Maybe a question, and maybe this is a hard question to answer. I've got 3 questions left here.
Yeah.
When you think of hope, in the case of Ticvah, your hope and your desire was the end result. And in many cases, my hope or our desire in times of struggle aren't what we get, even as faithful as we are trying to be.
Yes.
So in Ticvah's case, it's a miracle, and it's an incredible story of God's faithfulness.
Yes. Yes.
Prior to Ticvah, though, you lost a baby, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so my curiosity is, how do you, like, so not everyone listening to this is going to have that same experience where
Yes.
they hoped for something and it came through. Sometimes the hope that they hoped for didn't come through. I'm curious how you have this experience with Ticvah, but what about now that experience of the loss at 29 weeks?
Yes.
Where did you find hope in that? Like, how did you find hope in that context? Because these are two very different stories.
Yes. I think the outcome is not what was really pushing us forward. We were not being prompted by the outcome. We were being prompted by a relationship with God, simply. And we knew that any of the outcome was going to be part of our story with Him. When we lost our child in 2012, we just thanked God. It was painful, it was hard to swallow, because not that we had any merits, but we knew that it was a tough one, but we had entrusted a daughter in better hands. And even if we had come to lose Ticvah, it would have been painful, the separation, but we would have been at peace to know that she's in better hands. So what keeps us going is the awareness of the fact that this is not all we have as a life. We have a transcending life as well, another dimension of ourselves. Whether it ends, whether our time here expires and whether our life here ends, it is not the end per se, it's just a transition. We believe in a God who's loving in this life and is even more loving to give us a better eternity and a life beyond. So in a sense, we don't see any fragmentation in our story, in our relationship with God. And therefore, anything that can happen, whether I leave or I die, because coronavirus is busy running around, it could claim my life from someone in my family. I don't wish for it, but that won't alter my relationship with God, because he has control. Just to trust God that He has control in this life and the one after. That, in a nutshell, is what keeps us going.
Wow, thanks for sharing, Luc.
Welcome.
I know we could talk for probably 24 hours about this, and
yes, and
hopefully one day this book that you've talked about comes to fruition, and whoever's listening, we can let them know of where to find that story and read the full story, because there's a lot of learning we can do from that. But at this point, I have two final questions that I'd like to ask you, and then I'll thank you for your time. And the first one is, Luc, what is it when you look back, and if people were to remember who Luc is, what's the simple piece that you want people to think of when they think of Luc? How do you want people to remember you?
I think I want them to see me as someone who had a trench in history, someone who has been able to impact on human history by simply trusting God and believing that He can bring you to a point of witnessing great miracles in this 21st century. That's one aspect. But the other aspect is I want to be remembered for the good I've done around me, how I've impacted on lives, from my family to my wife to my kids to everybody else in the community or even on the planet. I want to be remembered as a man of good, as a man promoting good. And also, I want to be remembered as someone who could stand for his beliefs and his thoughts. Because although I'm a man of peace, not everything is to be promoted. I do not agree with everything that's spreading around the planet in terms of tolerance. I show a lot of tolerance and respect, but I do not compromise. So those are some of the aspects I really want to focus on. Yeah.
No, thanks, Luc. And lastly, if you were to give somebody advice who's walking through a tough journey, or whose journey ended the way they maybe didn't desire or hope it to end, or is just feeling uncertain and concerned, how would you encourage them to find hope?
It's okay to hurt. It's really okay to hurt, because we cannot have control on everything. But sometimes healing comes where we surrender control. It's healing to many extents. It doesn't mean that we get the outcome we're anticipating, but it might mean that we cope a lot better with the loss. I think winning and losing are both part of the experience of this life here. And we need to be sober enough to acknowledge that we don't have control on every single aspect of our history. We can decide what we can put on our body, but we cannot decide when this body is going to keep on staying alive. Things can happen, both to us and to our loved ones or to other people that we care about on the planet. And yet, it should not be a driving factor for us to nurture grudge, neither with God nor with man, because things do happen, but sometimes time has the key to purpose. Things can only make a sense when the time is right for us to understand why is it that we failed in the first place, or why is it that we succeeded in the first place. That's about it.
Thank you very much, Luc. I just so appreciate you joining us. And
I thank you, Paul, and thank you, Zach.
Yeah, Luc, maybe before we end, I don't know how we'd fit this in, but is Ticvah nearby? I would love to. Could you bring Ticvah in, and are you okay?
Yes. Hi there, Mbote! Mbote!
Mbote Nabino. Thanks for watching today's episode. We hope you enjoyed it. We're going to have weekly episodes every Monday night at 7 p.m. Central Time. We'll be releasing a new episode. If you like the video, hit subscribe. Feel free to comment if you have something to say. We'd love to hear from you. If you have a story of hope that you think would be worth sharing, let us know. Our email is in our About section on our YouTube channel. We'll see you next week.